So next is up on stage is my good friend, Diego, from the Samsung Internet team, and he's going to talk about web VR and how to bring VR to the web.
Okay, so let's get started. So my name is Luis Diego Gonzalez. I work with Samsung, the Research Institute in the UK, and probably you might be thinking, so Samsung does phones, yes. Samsung does fridges, yes. So why is there a Samsung guy actually talking about VR? I mean, what does it have to do? Well, it turns out that apart from phones and fridges, we also do a browser. And I don't know if you guys are aware that we have a browser. Can I see some hands to see if you actually know that Samsung had a browser? Okay, actually, I think this is the highest percentage that I've got, so quite happy. We do have a browser. It's called the Samsung Internet. Why does this matter? Because basically it's a browser that's based in Chromium. Samsung is probably, no, not probably, Samsung is the second largest contributor to the Chromium project. And therefore, we have a particular idea on how a browser should be, what are the features and functionalities that it should have, and how should it interface with our devices as well. So it's a browser that's constantly updated, following the evergreen concepts. And we do have a significant engineering effort towards making sure that our browser is the best of the best, or that's what we try to do. And by the way, I'm going to count this out of my time because it's just kind of like a rant. But have you guys actually noticed that at Mobile World Congress there's only one browser that's being represented, and that's kind of cool because in a way it's us. So thanks. But in the other way, it's kind of sad because I think that it speaks a lot that we need to be pushing the web harder. I mean, come on, Google, hi Mozilla. Microsoft, I mean, we need to really make this a bigger push for this. So rant over. I love all the other browsers. So coming from the academic side, I want to start just with a definition, let's say a formal definition, and I promise there's not going to be another slide that has so much text. So it says that virtual reality is the computer-generated simulation of a three-dimensional image or environment that can be interacted with in a seemingly real or physical way by a person using special electronic equipment such as a helmet with a screen inside or gloves fitted with sensors. So pretty fancy, but in the end, it's just something that looks more or less like this. And yes, this is a user experiencing VR in the 21st century, so we are quite advanced. But we want to delve a bit deeper into how can we build a VR experience nowadays. So we're going to break this image into several parts. And yeah, so if we break this image into several parts, we do notice that there are some elements that are quite important. First, we can start talking about the head-mounted display, obvious in it, and it's one of the most important ones. Audio, people don't really tend to value audio as much as they do, but it's a huge part of VR. Interaction, and here there's a lot of challenges, and we're going to see what are the possibilities that we have. And finally, which I personally believe that this is the one that can make a difference for VR, is content, and we're going to see why. So talking a little bit about these. So head-mounted display. Required, more like desired, let's say that we're talking about less than 20 milliseconds motion to photon, because otherwise you're going to get sick and you might want to puke, and we do not want to make our users puke. So that's kind of like required. Then again, Oculus DK2 has already been doing this. Of course, the Gear VR and any modern VR headset is capable of doing it. Now, then we can talk about display resolution. Display resolution depends on who you ask. I've asked, for example, people from the Fraunhofer Institute about what's the desired resolution that we want for VR. Some of them argue that not even 8K per eye is going to be sufficient. But then again, I think we've been pretty well to date with if we use a Galaxy S7 phone to create VR, then we are actually getting a WQHD resolution. One of the best VR experiences that's on the market, the PlayStation VR, it's actually using a full HD display. So I won't get into the display resolution argument, but you kind of get the facts there. Audio, basically, audio must be consistent with what you see. Otherwise, you're going to break the experience. And for this, it is desirable to have, of course, 3D positional audio. If we move into interaction, here it kind of depends, because we've seen I think the presentations by Dom and Beleng are great because they kind of like link into some of the things that I'm going to be speaking about. And if we're talking about interaction, it depends on the type of experience that you want to develop, that you are going to pick which interaction techniques you're going to have. So let's say that you want to use a standard Bluetooth controller. That's valuable. If you want to do a game, if you want to connect the game to the VR, then that would be good. But let's say you want to have some 3DOF. Okay, so let's think about a Daydream, Google Daydream control, 3DOF, Samsung Gear VR control as well. You're able to connect that. Maybe you're interested more in like SIG stuff, you know, like the fancy things. I'm kind of like going down and the environment is just tracking where I'm moving and where I'm going. And it would make sense then to use HTC Vive, or I just want some depth sensing capabilities like Microsoft Kinect, Leap Motion, which they're actually showing a very cool prototype at Mobile World Congress. So you should definitely go and check it out if you have the chance. So depending on what's the experience that we want to build, we need to think very carefully about the interaction. And of course, the one that I'm a bit worried about is the content. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your default App Store. This is a wonderful, pre-approved, closed environment where if the gatekeeper does not like what you're building, it's simply not going to be there. And that is the sad truth. So, sorry, it was supposed to be appearing while I was saying it, because then it kind of looked cool, like synced. But anyway, it's, you know, kind of like the perfect place where you can just go to wait several minutes to download hundreds of megabytes for an experience that you're probably only going to use once. Isn't that lovely? Huh? Sounds like, you know, you can start thinking about it, but if only we had this platform, this I don't know, I'm thinking like something open, like, you know, like fast and kind of like secure, frictionless, accessible, of course widely distributed because we want to get our content to everyone, cross-device, easy to share and scalable. I don't know, but who is ready here? Can I see some hands? Who is ready? Okay, I need more hands because we need to be ready for this. We need to be ready for this. Good. Okay, so you're not alone because there are several browsers that are all ready. And when we're talking about who is ready, we're talking about which browser has manifested enthusiasm into collaborating into the WebVR community group specification, yada, yada. Of course, Samsung Internet, we are very interested in the WebVR specification and in VR in the browser as a whole. Mozilla is quite great. Microsoft is doing some fairly good efforts as well. Probably, if I'm not mistaken, kind of like bridging with AR for the HoloLens. And Chrome, of course, Google. Now, there's no word from Opera and Safari, but we are hoping for the best. Now, Dan, I'm going to ask for a favor, because could you take a picture of this, please? So I can tweet this to Brendan. We are hoping that other browsers as well are joining the efforts and the enthusiasm for WebVR. Brendan Ike, he was in the audience today. He's the CEO of Brave. So we're going to send him a clear message. Please support and get behind WebVR. Now, in theory, this looks very nice. When you kind of put it into practice, a bit more complicated because of platforms, because of operating systems, and, well, you kind of get the idea. To be honest, when I was doing this table, there were even some icons that I had no clue what they were. But I do got to say that the one with the dog is it's just amazing. Then again, if you're probably thinking about developing for VR, then you're probably thinking in targeting one of these platforms: Samsung Gear VR, Google Cardboard, Google Daydream, Oculus, Vive, or HoloLens. And depending on the combination of operating system that you might have and the browser in which you want to use your content, you might want to see that there's not one device that can cover them all, but there is one common denominator, and this common denominator is that WebVR supports every single, let's say, everywhere you see a check, WebVR is present there. So you develop for WebVR, you're pretty much getting your experience in every single platform that's out there, except PlayStation, but they haven't really said anything about the technology. Whoever spots a check under an apple gets a free pair of socks. No questions needed. No, I'm kidding. You won't spot it. But anyway, it still works because, you know, polyfills. So if you create a WebVR application, don't worry, it's going to run in your favorite iOS device as well. And hopefully they'll get supporting the specification as well. So if we go back to the main idea, the one that I started, when we were saying that we want to kind of like break the image apart, this is how the web has a solution for every single, let's say, one of the main parts that we identified. So we're talking about the head-mounted devices. We can mention the WebVR API. If we're talking about audio, we have the Web Audio API. Interaction, I'm going to have to go with Gamepad API for that one, although they're kind of like different alternatives. And content. Content, this is kind of cool because we can have 360-degree media. And this is not only developer-focused. I'm going to probably get into that in a second. Frameworks and engines. So let's just see what do all these weird API names mean, although they are quite well named, thanks W3C. So WebVR API. So WebVR API is pretty much an experimental JavaScript API that provides access to virtual reality devices that are connected physically to the browser. This means that if I'm running WebVR in an HTC Vive, I'm going to have access to the headset, to the screen in the headset. I'm going to have access to any other VR devices, and the controllers are considered VR devices as well. So all we need is an amazing browser, a modern browser, and a headset. Look in the list when we had the checks for those browsers. And the way that we would get them is by querying the navigator.getVR displays. Easy peasy. If we continue with web audio, and here I'm not a big expert on web audio, so please don't get too technical here. But basically, web audio is the way that the browser handles. It can have different inputs. So you can have streaming media. You can have media that's already in an audio element on the web page, or you can generate mathematically oscillator inputs as well. You can apply effects to these nodes, to these different inputs, and then generally they get directed to the output, which it's just a destination, which generally it's just like the speakers that are connected to the computer. How do you query this? You can get to window.audio content. So again, very easy. The Gamepad API, this is an interesting one because I've used it, and the first time that I got like my Xbox controller and I paired it to my phone and I was actually moving something, I was actually using Phaser. It was very, very cool, and I was moving it. It was like, wow, so I'm actually using the same controller that I have, and I can, it kind of just makes you think of all the different possibilities that you have for creating new content. What would you expect from the Gamepad API? It does connect controllers and gamepads to the browser, so you do get them, and you can, of course, react to when a button is pressed, when a trigger is pressed. But also, there's some, if you dig into the specification, you do get that there is support, or will be support, for gamepad haptics. So I will be able to make my controllers vibrate from the browser. And this is useful, for example, if we're using an Xbox controller, then we might want to, react to. So when the rock girl is killing the hipsters, then, the controller starts vibrating, and that just makes it so much more real right? Okay, so then we can talk about 3 DOFs and 6 DOFs. Basically, who knows here what a DOF is? Okay, so basically, it's very easy. 3 DOF is, let's say, orientation. So when you have a controller and, let's say, a wand, when you can detect how it's oriented, that's 3 degrees of freedom, 3 DOF. And 6 DOF is orientation plus position. So if we're talking about current devices that are on the market, we see the recently announced Samsung Gear VR controller and the Google Daydream. Those are 3 degrees of freedom. Why? Because if you have used them, you can see that you're seeing the controller, and the controller is actually responding to how you're moving it, but only in orientation. So it does funny things, like you take the controller, you put it in your other hand, and the visualization is still on the other side, but the orientation gets it right. And then you can get fairly advanced stuff, like 6 degrees of freedom, which would be position. So that would be more HTC Vive with the room trackers. It also has touchpad support for those controllers that have a touch area. Vive, Gear VR controller, Daydream, and it has gamepad extensions for everything that the future will bring. So, if we think about another way of interacting with our experiences, we can say, whoa, but it would be kind of cool if I could kind of like speak to my browser and then make a very cool experience. It is possible. Some of these APIs are experimental, but they're being constantly worked on. The web speech API, I've made a couple of examples with this, and it's very cool because you can use the speech recognition interface to actually speak to your browser, and depending on the words that you're matching, then you would get an action executed. And now we move to the part that I think is a bit more critical, which is content. And if we're talking about content, people are trying to kind of like get the secret sauce to VR, and I worked for too long in 3D on my PhD. I'm not regretting it, but what happened was that I think there was really never enough content, and the problem was that the user never had content that they could kind of like identify with. And I think we're already in a much better position just because we have devices like every Android device now can take like spherical pictures. So yeah, it's the one where you kind of look a bit dumb when you're like click, 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 but then in the end you're getting a spheric picture. Ricoh has new devices. I've heard that Samsung has a very good one as well, and Nikon has also a very good one. So the fact that a user can actually start acquiring cheap hardware and it's an easy stitching process, I think that's going to help a lot, because then we're going to be not only annoyed by the Instagram stories in 2D, but we're going to be annoyed by Instagram stories in 360. But this is quite important. And continuing now, a bit more developer-oriented frameworks, engines, and renderer. We've heard several now throughout the day. Play Canvas, 3JS, WebGL, A-Frame, Unity as well. So these, you can combine them, you can use them with other libraries to actually create very cool content. I personally want to give a big, cool shout-out to Mozilla and the A-Frame project, because it's amazing, and I'm pretty sure that you guys will love it. Basically, we have here HTML code for one page, and the 3 lines that are highlighted, this is the only thing you need to create a web VR experience in a browser. This takes care of cameras, lights, head tracking, and all the other more annoying, and let's say not annoying, a bit more complicated things. So 3 lines of code, and you can just start putting your content. If you have 3D models that you've done in Blender, you can just import them, you can animate them, you can manipulate them with JavaScript, you can, etc., etc., etc. So very cool project. Now, for the people that say, what about visual fidelity? I'm not a personal believer of visual fidelity. I think that the storytelling can be so much more powerful, and I actually do believe that a 360 image inside kind of like a sphere, as long as it's tracking you correctly, it can be considered VR. But anyway, we have here some examples. First one, Star-Lord. This is an example that was developed by Play Canvas, and it's running on their web GL renderer. So depending on how you change the lights, the helmet actually reflects that. It's very, very cool. You have the address there in very tiny writing, so I can give you the addresses later. And then we have, for example, this other experience where it's more focused towards accessibility and how would you be seen through an avatar on the web. So basically, VR is quite a fragmented platform, so if I can have like a profile that's not, oh my god, how does my hair look? Well, it doesn't look because I don't have, but how does my not only my appearance, but more or less kind of like, what's the configuration of devices that I'm using? What's my headset with my mobile, with my browser? So based on that, I can see if the browser is supporting certain APIs or not, and I can kind of like tailor this experience to me. Anyway, as Josh Carpenter from Google states, if visual fidelity was all that mattered, we would be watching Blu-rays instead of Netflix. So we've kind of seen that we do have options in the browser for every single one of these problems, but the question, it kind of begs the question, why WebVR? Does it make any sense? For me, the answer is quite simple, and it's pretty much that it democratizes VR. So, the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised directly by them. And I think this is exactly what Google Cardboard and Samsung Gear VR have been doing by enabling and distributing very low cost, and actually we can talk about Google Daydream as well now, distributing low cost devices. So, if we talk about demand for content, is there any demand for content? I would say there is. If we look at the panorama, June 2016, we can see that there are over 200,000 registered developers to work on Oculus content, 1.3 million subscribers to the YouTube 360 channel, and the Cardboard app has been downloaded over 10 million times. If we want to talk about availability of devices, I'm just saying the Gear VR outsold every other major VR headset on the market. Just dropping it. It's not me, it's Wired, the one that's saying it. But also, I'm just saying, I just read when I was sitting there that actually Google announced that I think there are 10 million Cardboard devices out there since they launched 2 years ago. So, okay, there's pretty much a lot of devices out there, and that kind of justifies, that we do have, that there's an expanding number of VR enabling devices. Now, from a consumer side, price is a dominant factor in actually acquiring VR equipment. So it would kind of make sense, if we're talking about web VR, that we would be able to enable these experiences in devices that cost something around the price that the user actually wants to pay. So assuming that we all have a phone, the cost of a Google Daydream, Samsung Gear VR, or Google Cardboard is quite inexpensive. So you kind of start seeing a pattern here, how everything starts aligning into why it would make sense to dig into WebVR. From a developer side, let's say that we want to kind of like tap into the huge community of web developers that's already in existence. This is just an indication. Which is the most popular language on GitHub. And I think if we can leverage all this experience in developers, then it just makes getting content out there so much easier without having to depend on AAA game studios just shoving shooters in our face. Also, there's kind of like interest for things that are not only games. These are the VR use cases that consumers are interested in. There is gaming, but you can see that it's not like the top most desired by users. And just to corroborate this, so a couple of months ago, I think it was last month, Virtually ran a global hackathon focused on web VR. And they did an open submissions, and what they realized, this is from the partners debrief that we got sent. Categories included social VR, templates, tools, healthcare, medicine, education, arts, crafts, products, engineer, science, sports, advertising, trades, and craft. And only 17% of the entries were related to games. So I think this actually speaks very highly of the web community by saying that if we just put the technology out there, people are going to start doing great things with it. Now, we know now how WebVR can make sense, but what about WebVR on mobile? If we focus on mobile, we can think about what do you need in order to get this working. We would need, of course, a browser, a modern browser. We would need a mobile. We would need a headset, and let's say any other interaction device would be optional. But the idea is that we should be able to develop experiences that would scale gracefully, even if I don't have a headset. It doesn't make any sense if I'm creating new content that nobody's going to be able to see because nobody has a 1,500 machine. There are a lot of challenges, of course, for VR and, of course, for VR on mobile. Usability, there is tons that is being done on usability. How do you actually represent, how do you navigate, how do you link between content? Hardware, so I was telling you about how Leap was showing this very cool hand tracking on a Qualcomm kind of like prototype headset. And it was kind of cool because they were using the Orion framework. It worked very, very good. Then again, accessibility, and we're not only talking about accessibility for people with some sort of disability, but we're talking about the accessibility of content. We need to make sure that that all the content that we are creating, and this is very related to the other bullet point. So content, we need to make sure that the new content can play in devices that are, let's say, that I can play it on my phone, that I can play it on my PC, and that I can play it on Oculus Rift, because otherwise it's not really accessible. And we need to start thinking about existing content, because not every VR experience has to be, walking on Mars, shooting aliens. Not everything has to be like a huge virtual world. There are so many small examples that can actually enhance an existing 2D web experience. And I think that's where we could actually start making a difference with small examples on the web. Performance, security, a lot of issues that are great topics for another PhD, I guess, if somebody is actually interested. So I have some examples. I'm not going to show them at the moment because I don't want to take too much time. But if you are interested in any of these just come after the presentation and I can show them to you. There are 3 examples. One is called Quackman, the other one is called Bubble, and the other one is called WordDrop. So Quackman, you can see the PWA, it's for Progressive Web Apps, which is another of the terms that we've seen, that we've heard about today. So it's a Pac-Man-like game where the playing space surrounds the user. This one is actually using the Gamepad API. So when I entered Samsung, one of my first ideas, I told Dan, Dan, it would be so cool if we could have like a Pac-Man game, but like around you. Wouldn't that be cool? And then, so picture this, you have your headset, the ghosts are coming like on the sides. You're controlling Pac-Man with the Xbox controller. So it makes sense. But then I kind of developed it, and once you're wearing the headset and you have the gamepad, you look like this when you're trying to see if the ghost is coming or not. So there's clearly a big problem with usability there. And I learned something quite important. Do not place content all around the user that makes him have to be getting dizzy for no reason. Then again, it was a great experience, and the code is on GitHub if you guys want to make it better. And There's also Bubble. Bubble is just a 360 image viewer. This one uses the file API, so we're actually getting access to the files that are on your phone to upload a picture. So basically, I was on vacations, I was taking 360 pictures, and I couldn't share them with anyone because they needed to download an app. And who downloads apps, right? It's like 2017. So basically, I decided to create this experience where it's a web page. You can go on a PC, you can go on a mobile phone, you can even go tablets and other devices that have a modern browser. It even works on iPhones as well. So you go on this page, you select your 360 image, and there you go. It's using the device's sensors in order to move around, and you're actually viewing it. You don't have a headset. You don't need a headset. You can just interact with your finger, and that's the idea. It needs to be accessible. If you have a headset, you have a cardboard lying around, then you can tap on the cardboard icon, which is of course, the mouse is not seen here. So you can just tap on the little cardboard icon and put your phone in a Google Cardboard and a Gear VR, and you're immediately there, like if you were there present. This one is actually quite cool. Then I did another one which just creates words. This was just to test the speech recognition API. I just wanted to make sure that it was implemented in Samsung Internet. I just needed to be sure. So pretty much I did this application where you actually see this microphone, and once you tap on it, you start speaking to it. And yes, it does work in Catalan. It does. I've tried it. It works in Spanish, in Catalan, in English. So you pretty much just start speaking to it, and all the words that are being matched, and it's a shame that I should have put in a video, but I can show it to you after the presentation. I attached physics to the words. So the words start falling as if it were raining, and then I put like an invisible plane. So you start seeing words falling in front of you, and then you just kind of following them, and there they go, and then I just make them disappear. But this is just like a demo, that you can actually do WebVR and combine it with any other API that's on the browser. And yeah, it's kind of cool, because we've seen, I've talked about several examples. We've seen the benefits of WebVR, but wouldn't it be cool that this open, fast, secure, frictionless, accessible, widely distributed, cross-device, easy to share, scalable platform could also be like independent of connection? Because what's the point if I have like my Bubble application and I can like send the pictures of my trips to my mom if she doesn't have internet, or if my friend doesn't have internet? Well, it turns out that this is a bit tricky, because if it's a web VR experience, then it needs to be online, or does it? The thing is, I want to take web pages and I want to put them on the phone, and I want these web pages to behave like applications. They are already applications, but people don't really make the difference between web app and app. So what I want to do is something like this. I want to have my applications in the home screen and make them behave as a traditional application. I want web pages running from the device's home screen, capable of even sending notifications to the user and running offline. So what you're seeing now is a real screenshot of a phone, and you can see several of the icons that have the applications. This is more or less basic offlining thanks to service workers and progressive web apps. So think about the idea that I can have this Quackman experience, and I really want to play it on the tube in London where I don't have any connection. And you would be able to do that. I would be able to take Bubble and use it when I'm on a trip abroad and no internet connection. So it starts kind of becoming a very powerful idea. And okay, I forgot the slide. That slide was there. So quickly, we've been talking about VR on the web, but then again, it's so big, this area, that nobody has ever, kind of like cared about the web in VR. Everyone's thinking about VR on the web, and nobody's thinking about the web on VR. So what does this actually imply for the browser? We can start thinking about new flows of interacting with our devices. Maybe I'm browsing something on my phone, I put it on the headset, it automatically goes to the page, and then I take it out and it automatically goes to the other browser. Maybe we can start thinking about new browsers, and Samsung Internet has a version that is specifically designed for the Gear VR. Oculus is creating one that's specifically for the Gear VR as well. That's called Carmel, and it's just focused on web VR. And Mozilla, we have Servo as well. So we need to start thinking about, what does this mean for the browser? We also need to start thinking, what does this mean for existing content in the browser? This is an image. The source is Josh Carpenter from Google. He's been researching a lot of extending HTML into space. And yes, it is kind of similar to what we were doing a couple of years ago. So it's quite interesting, the idea that you're actually taking this content and just overlaying it. What if we could take the set index or CSS 3D transformations and just make them real 3D? And if you have a browser that's capable, you just bring them out. That would be quite cool. So yeah, what do you guys think? Can the web and VR work well together? It kind of seems to me that they do. Now we just need to make this happen because the tools are there. We just need to make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Diego.
Thank you.
Any questions for Diego?
Did I at least change your mind about web VR that it's cool? Yes? Okay, cool. Cool, I'm happy now. Yes?
All right, wait, one question. That's not a good enough question to get a socks.
I'm afraid I'm too young to remember VRML.
Oh,
but
ouch.
Dan,
double ouch.
But
note to self.
yeah, I never used it.
I do remember VRML, but yeah, well, sometimes things need to come back in another form in order to become successful, I think. Okay, so next we're going to move right on to Salva, who's going to end our event telling us about progressive web apps, I think, and other technologies, new web technologies.